Alrighty. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone who's watching this presentation. This is my first of a very, very, very large series of presentations I'll be doing on various debates I've had with my students. I am a high school teacher at a Christian school who strongly believes in the value of debate as a means of working through worldview, ethical, philosophical, biblical, and theological questions. I do think that one of the best ways to get people to understand something is to have them debate about it, whether they really agree with it or not. It's a valuable means of helping students to feel more motivated in the process of researching, presenting, designing, and finally executing their presentation in the form of an argument logically founded. So, in order to start this very, very large series, and by large series, I mean a large series I've had with my students in the last year and a half, about 100 debates that I've participated in with them. It's across a lot of my different classes, so I try to make that a pretty big part of my methodology. This one, I'll be starting off with a very special one. I think it's rare that my students choose to make me the one who offers up a position that I actually agree with. Usually they make me do something heinous. They'll choose whatever topic they have and they'll have me, their teacher, act as the opponent for whatever presentation they're doing. But for this one, they chose the pro-choice position and I was gifted the opportunity to do a pro-life argument, which is one of the few times where I got to be myself for a debate. So it was very, very exciting. In this abortion debate, I'm hoping for all of you watching, you have a chance to understand how a Christian or even a secular individual would be able to approach this question about pro-life and the value of pro-life positions. So, as we go through this presentation, please understand that it's not just Christians or religious people who are pro-life, but even many secular people. There's secular groups that you'll see on this presentation who argue for the value of a pro-life position over that of a pro-choice position. And so, while I might disagree with a lot of secular and atheistic people on some of their meta-ethical and metaphysical foundations for ethics, I do think it's valuable to show the places where we have some agreement. Without further ado, let's get started with this presentation. So, my opening statement goes as follows. The value of life, the call for responsibility and logical biblical thinking. These things are all rejected by the horrid movement, which has come to be known as the pro-death movement, otherwise known as pro-choice. I will be arguing that the Bible is clear about the value of life, that science proves that biological life begins at conception, and that the murder of innocent life is a eugenicist, racist, sexist, genocidal, postmodern foray into the evil, irresponsible, and demonic. I shall also deal with the foolish and illogical arguments that my opponents will bring, even though they don't realize how self-destructive and contradictory their own arguments are, at least not quite yet. Through my argumentation, I hope that you will all be open-minded enough to listen to God and what His Word says. If not to God, I hope you'll at least listen to various atheistic and secular scientists and Christian scientists too. And if you refuse to listen to God, to logic, to science, I can't really help you there. So, this is a good example of an opening statement that explains the issues I have with some of the opposition, while also giving just a little bit into the ways that I'll approach this. But to be clear, this isn't where my opening statement ends. I do have an explanation about why I'm pro-life. Try to have some explanations and definitions throughout a debate on pro-choice, pro-life issues. Definitions and defining your terms is a really good way to make sure you and the other person are on the same page. Otherwise, you might find yourselves talking past each other. So that's why I explain the why of my position. And then throughout this presentation, you'll see that I use a lot of definitions, a lot of citations, obviously, but quite a few definitions. And I'll use a mix of logos, of logic and facts, with also an emotional bent, because you have to understand a lot of these people in the pro-life, pro-choice discussions, they're not just looking at facts. I guarantee if people were just looking at facts, then there would be way more people in the pro-life group. There's also this emotional sense too, so you really have to learn to draw on that. Because trust me, if you're thinking, oh, well, that feels kind of manipulative. No, this is part of the logos, pathos, and ethos of rhetoric. Pro-choice people are really good at knowing how to appeal to emotions, even if they completely avoid the logos, the logic, and the facts of it. So, as a pro-life apologist, you have to really understand that it's a valuable method of winning people over. Appeal to the heart as well as to the mind. So why am I pro-life? Because I am pro-science, right? I think everyone understands. I think it's about 93 to 95% of all scientists agree that biological life happens at conception for all species. And that's very specific language I'm using. Biological life. I didn't say personhood or whatever. Biological life. Okay. Number two, because social justice begins at the womb. And I agree with this. Under the Constitution, every single human being is entitled to the same protections. First and foremost is the right to life before liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And have liberty and the pursuit of happiness without life. So it's a very key moment. Because I am pro-woman. Abortion degrades woman and allows men to benefit from woman by eliminating the primary biological ability that women have over men. Furthermore, abortion allows men to get away with using a woman for illicit sexual usage for the sake of pleasure-seeking and hedonistic lifestyles without actually taking any responsibility for the effects this might have on the woman. So I am pro-woman. I'm also pro every woman that's in the womb. I am pro-girl as well. So because there's a lot of young women who could have been wonderful individuals and were killed in the womb. So I'm pro-woman as well because of the visible evidence from ultrasounds, MRIs, which show the baby to be a living, reacting, and growing organism. So it's not just a clump of cells, and don't worry, we'll deal with that rhetoric later. It's not just a clump of cells, it's a living, reacting, growing individual. And number five, and this is the part where I guess I would break away most fully with the secular pro-life groups, but I believe in the scripture and in objective morality. Heck, even atheists who reject scripture recognize objective morality a lot of the time. You'll find this in a lot of ethical literature that even many atheists and secularists do hold to a type of moral realism in the moral landscape. So I think that they would agree with me even on that part, even if they don't believe in the scripture. So here's where we get into some of my more specific arguments, but this was a big part of my opening statement. Usually to my students for other debates, I say try to mix all of your arguments into the opening statement so the audience knows the approach you're taking. For this one, I just had so many arguments against it, and this is a very comprehensive presentation, okay? To be very clear, you should definitely try to deal with each argument I'm presenting and see the whole entire presentation because throughout this, I'm going to be very, very comprehensive as much as I could for a 45-minute long class that I had last year in this presentation. So just follow along with me and really take the time to pause the video if you need to, read the whole entire slide, and then move forward. So, for this argument section, it begins. Argument number one, God says that it is sinful to kill innocent life, and many atheists say the same. So you might be wondering, why do you keep on bringing God into this? Well, that's because in this original debate, my opponents were pro-choice Christians. Many of the students at the school that I teach at least last year before this debate, were pro-choice Christians. But since the debate and after the debate, I don't see as many pro-choice individuals. And I think this debate was at least helpful in helping them to realize that there's way more logic and way more reason on the pro-life side, and even that there's more emotional appeal than they gave credit for before. So it at least it changed some students' minds explicitly, but other students at least they were swayed. So we're working. In either case, it was a Christian group, so I started with the Christian and generally religious argument, which is premise one. God condemns the unjustified murder of the innocent. Premise two, the unjustified murder of the innocent is what almost all abortions are. Therefore, God condemns almost all abortions, right? And so I used a little bit of a qualification. Therefore, God condemns almost all abortions at least. This is going to be an at least because, unjustified murder of the innocent. We'll explain the qualification for that later on. Just understand this almost all abortions doesn't mean he doesn't condemn all abortions, right? This is going to depend on how you define abortion. So I have some scripture to go along with that. If you have a Christian audience, that can be really helpful. To be very clear, if you understand abortion to be those things which are not medically necessary in order for a mother to live, then you could actually change this argument to say God condemns the unjustified murder of the innocent. The unjustified murder of the innocent is what all abortions are. Therefore, God condemns all abortions. If a mother is about to die because of a baby and some sort of extremely rare ectopic pregnancy, then I would not actually classify that as an abortion. I would say that that is a medical termination because now we're choosing between lives and not choosing to kill one life for the sake of a mother who simply doesn't want to have it. So in this case, just from a utilitarian perspective, we have no choice but to save one and let the other die. So that would be a case where there's a medical termination that is not an abortion. An abortion has a different connotation to it. So I would say, therefore, God condemns all abortions if you define abortion correctly. Atheist pro-life arguments. This is something I saw on a lot of secular pro-life websites, so let's check it out. Premise one, abortion restrictions do significantly decrease abortions. Most later abortions are not for medical reasons. The zygote is a human individual, which is, this is not a premise one, two, and three in the general classical method. These are just responses that they're giving with a lot of enthymemes in between. All right, don't worry about it. Conclusion, therefore, abortions are not universally justifiable and should be restricted or abolished. So I really think that's a pretty strong argument from the atheistic, secular pro-life perspective. And so, consider that. But again, this was only because some of my students didn't know the difference between an abortion and potentially necessary medical termination. So if that's the case, if you're dealing with people who do know the difference, then you can actually modify premise one, two, and conclusion for the Christian side of it to say the unjustified murder of the innocent is what all abortions are, because they already know what the word abortion means. So therefore, God condemns all abortions, which is true. Argument number two, science and philosophy both agree that the child is an individual living human being at conception. So premise one, whatever individual has their own human genetic code, which develops into a grown human being, is a human. The zygote at conception and fertilization has their own genetic code, which develops into a growing human being. Therefore, the zygote at conception or fertilization is a human. So, if we're clear on that, that's how I would argue that that's what we use to define what a human being is, right? This individual who has the genetic code particular to human beings. And so, from Steve Jacobs, I asked thousands of biologists when life begins. The answer wasn't popular. Interesting article. 89% identifying as liberal, 85% identifying as pro-choice, yet 96% agreed with the statement human life begins at conception. So this is actually beyond the, political landscape here. This is as close to scientific consensus as you can get on a lot of this, right? When does life begin? At conception. Philosophically, logically, scientifically, whichever way you want to go, it begins at conception. And that's a human life, right? A human life. Therefore, we've already clarified that is a human being. Okay? Argument three, in the case, and this is really important because I'm trying to explain and preemptively prepare for all the claims my students are going to make. So I've already explained this is a human being, and then I'll later clarify, well, since we already proved that it's biologically a human being, we shouldn't kill this human being because it's wrong to kill innocent human beings, right? So it's just a universal application of that claim. Argument three, in the case of rape and incest, there is no logical way that abortion makes the situation better. So again, since we've already proved from the prior slides that the child in the womb is biologically a living human individual and murder is the intentional removal of innocent life, we know abortion is murder. So just remember that, okay? Remember that abortion is murder. So let's talk about what happens with this case. Murder plus rape is worse than rape alone and thus should be illegal. Well, that's premise one. Premise two, abortion is murder. Conclusion, therefore, abortion plus rape is worse than rape alone and thus should be illegal. That's really clear, and you could just do the same exact thing with the incest part of it. Therefore, just adding murder to the situation doesn't somehow make it better. It actually makes it worse. It makes it worse because murder is wrong, rape is wrong, therefore murder plus rape is wrong. And abortion is murder, so, same principle. But also there's other reasons that I'll clarify right here. Argument number four, or at least an extension of the previous argument, abortion does not fix women in rape situations. So legally, in rape scenarios, many men are not persecuted or prosecuted for their crime of rape because the woman lacks sufficient evidence. Sometimes they say it's your word against his word, but obviously bringing a child to term would be a pretty good case for the woman. Number one, it's like very clear genetic evidence. Number two, it's very clear long-lasting evidence that, oh, this was the thing that caused this event to happen. And then number three, this is something that would be more helpful in these court cases to say, hey, this person caused, this child to be born. This person should be held financially responsible for this woman in some sense, even more than just the psychological part. But, this is a human being. So I think legally it could be very helpful to a lot of women. Number two, logically and morally. And when I say it's helpful, I mean just allowing the child to come to term. That's very helpful for them in legal cases. But then number two, logically and morally, adding murder to rape in no way makes anything better. If anyone should die, it should be the rapist. If someone had to die, it should be the rapist who is guilty, not the child who's innocent. And I think that's pretty clear. Now, some people would say, yeah, but it's just not fair for the mother to have to carry this child, all the way to term. And I would say, okay, I can understand why that's difficult for that woman. She has to do that for, all those months. Why not change the system so that the small percentage of women who get abortions because of, sexual assault, those women are just financially supported through their pregnancy, either from churches and their, surrounding environment, from the people in their environment, or from the government, instead of, forcing them to be part of some sort of corporation in which they're fighting to get the money they need just to survive. No, have them be offered some sort of aid from the government or from the individual who sexually assaulted them to get them through their pregnancy so that they could survive and do more than just survive, get the psychological care they need to deal with the sexual assault. That makes way more sense than killing a kid over the wickedness of a sexual assault individual, the one who sexually assaulted this woman. Number three, psychologically. So your plan is to fix trauma by adding more trauma. This is really clear. Abortion is traumatic. A lot of pro-choice individuals actually advocate for this position as well. They say, you don't understand. A lot of you pro-lifers act like women flippantly do this, which many women do. They just flippantly go and get an abortion. They just leave and they feel good about it and post TikToks of them dancing about it, which they do. Many women do. But really, it's a very traumatic experience. I would say yes and amen. Abortion is a very traumatic experience. A very large number of women, a very large percentage of women who get abortions leave with lifelong trauma, depression, worsened sleep due to nightmares, lower self-esteem, constant feelings of guilt and regret. And you could check out, if you want to, some of the studies I cited down there. There is significantly worse mental health outcomes for these women who got abortion. It leads to a lot of trauma. So I would not add the trauma that comes from abortion to the trauma that comes from sexual assault. That just doesn't help a woman in any meaningful way. And then for women who perform abortions have a significantly higher chance of developing breast cancer when it comes to some of those hormonal or chemical abortions. And so that's just, worth considering. Again, it just doesn't help the woman. In these cases, it just doesn't help them. Argument number four, abortion is genocide, infanticide, eugenics, ableist, and racist. So this is going to be very polemical, all right? I know there's ways for people to respond to this, but you see a lot of the people who are pro-choice claiming that there's some sort of fascist intent behind pro-life politics. They'll say that there's some sort of authoritarian regime, and they'll make complaints about Handmaid's Tale, even though that's completely different because the woman in Handmaid's Tale actually wanted to keep their own kids and not kill them. And it was a reflection not of Christian society, but of Islamic societies. Whatever. For the sake of this argument, okay? This is polemical, but this is using their polemics, right? These are the things that they're all talking about constantly, eugenics and ableism, racism, infanticide, all this stuff. So let's talk about that. Genocide and infanticide. 60 million abortions performed in the US alone since 1973. Technically, the number's higher, but we'll stick with that. 60 million lives lost. This is more than all of the lives lost in World War II. This is equivalent to 10 Holocausts. Okay? 10. This is important, all right? This is a massive number of individuals lost. And if they say, oh, well, that's not human life loss, we already went through this. Biologically, those are human lives. Those are living human beings, living human individuals who were alive and then no longer, right? They no longer maintain the biological characteristics of living organisms. So this is clearly the loss of human life on a massive scale because it's something that had its own complete genetic code. Again, it had the total number of chromosomes and genetic information necessary for an individual to properly develop, given a healthy and ideal scenario. Then eugenics and ableism. According to Planned Parenthood's own website, Sanger also believed in eugenics, an inherently racist and ableist ideology that labeled certain people unfit to have children. Again, this is from Planned Parenthood's own website. Check me on it, please do. Eugenics is the theory that society can be improved through planned breeding for desirable traits like intelligence and industriousness. That's from Planned Parenthood. So that's their own website. They admit to this. And then racism. More on Margaret Sanger, the major advocate for Roe v. Wade and abortion. In doing so, she undermined reproductive freedom and caused irreparable damage to the health and lives of generations of Black people, Latino people, Indigenous people, immigrants, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, and many others. Also from Planned Parenthood, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to think that people don't know the wickedness and evil that is the foundation and the root of a lot of the abortion politics. And it's interesting because a lot of leftists talk about the original sin of institutionalized racism and institutionalized patriarchy and how the roots of things are, the roots of ideas, the roots of institutions, the roots of political movements are necessarily tied to their fruits, right? So even if you have a flourishing society, if it's built on the backs of slaves, it's inherently evil all the way through, down to its bone marrow. If you have something that developed from old white men, then it's an inherently racist civilization the whole way through. No matter how good the later outcomes and the apologies and fixes and ethics, doesn't matter. It came from a wrong place at some point, therefore it's always wrong. Well, if that's the case, using the leftist critical race theory, all these kinds of intersectionality approaches to the original sin notion of racism, patriarchy, and sexism in America, how these are like negative institutions, and therefore, no matter how useful the institution might be to modern people, it should be abolished because it's intrinsically, essentially, originally, now primarily racist or sexist. That applies to abortion. Obviously, by their own standard, this applies to abortion. Because as we see, eugenics was at the base, racism was at the base of abortion. So, by their own standards, by their own methodology of evaluating good and evil, the ethical and axiological value of keeping certain institutions in government available to the public, we have to consider this according to their own standards, according to theirs. So you can say it like this. I shall explain the argument like this. Premise one, racism is the intentional targeting of some racial community in a way which harms or intends to harm the individuals of a specific or oppressed community. The vast majority of abortions in America kill, 67% of abortions kill minorities in America. 67% are tended towards minorities. Therefore, abortion is a racist institution that has led to the deaths of millions of predominantly minority children. This is literally the silencing of black and brown voices that leftists so often protest about. Except when it comes to this topic. Then suddenly it's no longer the silencing of black and brown voices. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, apparently. Racism is evil and should not be allowed. Premise 5, abortion is racist. It's a manifestation of racism. Therefore, abortion is evil and should not be allowed. Using leftist logic and their ethical foundations, this is a good argument, according to their own considerations of ethics and intersectional identities and intersectional institutions. You can do this for genocide, you can do this for ableism. It works pretty well. Evidence for the ableist data on abortion, besides Planned Parenthood's own admittance about the beliefs of Margaret Sanger and the common occurrences of the elimination of disabled people across the world. From the article, A Disabled Person's Perspective on Eugenic Abortion, abortion performed on the grounds that a baby has a disability is usually regarded as being one of the most publicly acceptable reasons for abortion. Some polls suggest that as many as 75% of British people think abortion should be allowed for disability. The discriminatory factor in these abortions is made clear by simple statistics. About 20% of all pregnancies are aborted, but about 90% of babies with spina bifida are aborted for or I'm sorry, as are 92% of babies with Down syndrome. This is, of course, in addition to the babies who are aborted for social reasons without their disability being detected or known. It gets really bad. I mean, it gets really bad. The moment that you see all of these leftists and these pro-choice individuals at one rally, they're talking about pro-choice, then, on their college campuses, I went to Brown, right? Tons of people talking about, oh, we have to get rid of ableism. There's so much hatred for all these people. They have bodies too. Disabled bodies exist. These people who have been oppressed, their bodies exist. People with Down syndrome, they exist. All of these intersectionally oppressed individuals in the differently able communities and disabled communities, they exist too, is what they'll say in these advanced college classes at Ivy League schools like Harvard and Brown, right? Trust me, I was at Brown, I saw it. Until it comes to abortion. Then they'll say people should be fully within their right to abort these disabled bodies. We have to, in effect, silence these disabled bodies because their lives are not worth having been carried through and on. Ignore all the stuff we said in our collegiate academic environments. That's just for show. We hate these people. They don't deserve life because they're not like us. Just true. It's just true. And then I did this just so people knew I didn't look at their slides beforehand. I just knew what they were going to bring up. So it's just to prove that it was real. Anyways, question one. These are some preemptive, so it's a different section. This is, just in case they bring up anything during cross-examination, this is an entire section I made. And for anybody watching this video, bookmark this, save this, share this section at this point. Anytime that somebody brings up a question that you hear all the time, send them this video and say, at this exact moment, he shows you exactly why this is an illogical or meaningless or not logically conclusive argument. Okay, so just this is a new section right here. This is all the general questions you'll hear in cross-examination. I made all of this in preparation for when my students would ask questions, although they only had a 4-slide presentation, mine is 39, a little bit different. And so just be prepared. You're finally going to feel some validation about all these questions you hear all the time in some simple ways to answer them. Okay? All right. Well, it's just a clump of cells. You'll hear this from a lot of pro-choice individuals. A good response, since this assumes a type of materialist view, right? Like all human beings are clumps of cells and all that life is just a clump of cells. You could say, okay, by your standards, so are you. What's your point, right? Because a clump of cells is just a large accumulation. It's a clump. It's a large accumulation of living cells. And so a baby who is born is a large accumulation of cells. A fetus before that is a large accumulation of cells. A human body after that is just a very large accumulation of cells. Saying something is a clump of cells doesn't mean anything because according to their material, their matter, that's just how it is to be a living thing. You're a clump of cells. So if you use that standard, you could say, oh yeah, well, you're a larger clump of cells, so you can dispose of that individual whenever you want to. It's not a good argument because by that standard, that applies to every single living thing on Earth because every single living thing is a clump of cells or just a single cell. They're either a single cell or a clump of cells. That's what they are, right? So it's not a good argument because that applies to every human being, adult or, either a fetus, zygote fetus or adult. These are just some examples of abortion, just so they have a clear understanding of what exactly goes into this procedure to really say, like, is that a clump of cells? I don't know if that is. And even if it was just a clump of cells, by their standard, again, all human beings are clumps of cells. Okay, they're all clumps of cells. So what good does it mean to say that? It doesn't actually add anything to the conversation because human beings, in terms of their matter, are clumps of cells, but we do have more than just that. And the Christian has a stronger argument because we could say we are souled beings, right? We are beings with souls. And so we're beings with souls and bodies. We're a hylomorphic dualism, right? We're a soul body unity. So we're not just clumps of cells, we're also individuals with minds or souls. Well, it's just a fetus, or maybe it's just an embryo. And I would ask, do you know what those terms mean? My logical argument has already proven that the child is a living human being at the moment of conception, according to at least 96% of all scientists around the world. If you say this, then you're totally and completely anti-science, right? So again, we've already proven that this is a living human being. So they could say fetus, they could say embryo, but we've already proven it's a living human being. So just remind them, no, we already agreed. This is a living human being. You could say it's just a fetus, but that fetus is still a living human being. Okay? We already clarified that. Embryo, still genetically a living human being. You don't go from being a potential human being to a human being. You go from a human being with potential to a human being with potential to a human being with potential because your entire life you're a human being with potential. So baby is an unborn or recently born human being from Webster's Dictionary. Then the embryo is the unborn baby from end of week 1 through week 8. Fetus is the unborn baby from the end of week 8 to birth. Human being is a genetic member of the species Homo sapiens, and they are a genetic member. And life, alive, or living is an organism with the following qualities: cellular organization, they have that as a baby, embryo, fetus. Growth and development, yeah. Metabolism and homeostasis, yep. Responsive to stimuli, yep. Reproductive capacity, that actually, the cells individually have that ability, but also over time that will develop into the sexual sense, not just the asexual self-replicating sense, and contains all of the genetic information needed to control its development for its lifetime, all of which are present at conception. And also, again, reproductive capacity. Actually, yes, the reproductive sexual capacity, the information is genetically present at conception. So, yes, that is still there. Well, I would never do an abortion. This happens a lot. So, this is a different one. This is when you're talking with maybe a Christian or you're talking with someone who sees how bad abortion is and they're like, okay, well, I would never do an abortion, but we shouldn't tell others what to do. Or they'll say, you're forcing others to believe what you do about abortion. And I'm like, okay, well, you're forcing me to stop telling others to believe, right? So that doesn't really mean anything. But for the first one, if someone says, well, I would never do an abortion, but we shouldn't tell others what to do, that's not nice. Just respond to them because they're missing it. It's not if you would never do it, because if you say, I would never do it, I'd ask you, okay, why? A lot of times they'll say, oh, well, because it's the murder of an innocent human being. It's like, okay. So you're saying you would never kill an innocent human being, but you don't think that we should tell other people not to. And they'd be like, oh, wait, that's not quite right. Another example, as I show on the slide here, is this. What would you say if someone said, well, I would never own a slave, but I don't think we should force others to stop owning them, right? They would probably say, whoa, 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 slavery is wrong. We can't just let other people own slaves. It's like, good, because it's essentially wrong, then you can't give a, oh, well, I would never participate, but we shouldn't judge others. No, we should judge others because it's wrong. If it's wrong, then it's wrong, whether we would want to judge them or not. It's just a fact. If you believe that something is fundamentally wrong with a moral issue, then you should call others to the same moral standard. Other people say my body, my choice. Actually, the child's body is not your body. The child is a genetically distinct individual developing. And if you use the violinist argument as a response here, and you'll understand that later, then you would be proving my exact point. If anything, I am pro-choice, pro the child's choice, but the child cannot make a choice yet. And I would is what they would say. And I would say in response, exactly. That is why we should let them be born so they can grow old enough to make their own choices about their life. Seems clear to me. But again, it's not her choice, or it's not her body, right? It's the child's body. But also to extend this a bit further, if the woman is saying it's her body, her choice, that means that her body, for some point, if she has a little baby boy developing in her, that means that her body has a penis. Because that's part of her body, right? And there's a penis developing on this young boy that's growing inside of her. So that means that her body, for a couple months, has a penis. Do do women just suddenly develop penises at a random point in pregnancy? Well, no. Oh, well, then that's clearly nonsense to say that that's her body, because now she is a woman with a vagina and a penis, right? Those are both part of her body. Or that if she has a little girl growing inside of her, now this woman, part of her body has two vaginas. Well, that can't be right. That sounds nonsensical to say that this woman has two vaginas, or a vagina and a penis, because she's a woman, which means that she would have one vagina, right? Sorry to be crass, but it's not crass. It's biology. It's pretty direct and simple. What I'm saying is it's nonsensical to say my body, my choice, because the implication means that this woman has two hearts, two sets of lungs, right? This woman has two brains, two consciousnesses, right? That's insane. That's nonsensical. No, an individual has their own set of those, not two sets of it. So just understand that as we're going through this. Only a woman can talk about abortion, is what you'll hear a lot of people say. No uterus, no opinion. And so there's a lot of ways to respond to this. You can be more direct and perhaps more offensive and say, oh, okay. Well, if only a woman can talk about abortion, I guess, no uterus, no opinion. I would say, oh, okay. Well, then no uterus, no responsibility, right? So as a man, I have no responsibility because if I can't talk about abortion, I don't really have any responsibility to the issue. So I shouldn't have to take care of kids, and you shouldn't yell at men who uh, let the woman take care of the kid by themselves. But actually, as a man, I can talk about abortion. I hope my opponents don't use such an illogical, brain dead argument, but let me explain. For those who say no uterus, no opinion on abortion, I can say, are you a cloud? Can't talk about clouds then. Have you done incest? Can't talk about it then. Have you stolen from a store? Can't talk about theft then. Are you a man? Then you cannot talk about how men should feel about abortion. That's a pretty clever response there. Are you currently a baby? Then you can't talk about the rights of a baby, of a young fetus. What if I identify as a woman for this discussion? Can I talk about abortion now? Apparently, right? And finally, since men have no say or responsibility in abortion and pregnancy, they shouldn't have any responsibility in taking care of the child after they're born, right? All men should be deadbeat. Well, that's a pretty horrible argument, you would think. They would probably say, no, that's all nonsense. You can talk about all that stuff. And as a response, we'd say, yeah. And so therefore, it's not only women who can talk about abortion in the same way that, you can't just be like, oh, only slave owners can talk about slavery. Like, no, that's silly. So only religious people are pro-life is it's not really an argument, it's kind of just a statement that they're claiming, but it's also just factually incorrect. So many women, both atheists and religious, minority and majority, advocate for pro-life. And so, we have a lot of information that comes from secularprolife.org, feministforlife.org, pro-black pro-life, Rehumanize International, the Feministas de la Nueva Ola, WordPress.com. So you have all this information from these various cases in which you have all these individuals from various approaches and ethnic minorities and stuff. And it shows quite clearly that there's actually a large number of individuals, especially women, who are pro-life, whether religious or not. Abortion restrictions do not decrease the number of people getting abortions, actually does. There's a lot of research to show that abortion restrictions do decrease the number of people getting abortions. And this is really clear, and even secularprolife.org actually cites this information quite a bit, that it actually is effective. It really is. Yeah, okay, but they aren't fully developed. I mean, they're a fetus, right? They aren't fully developed. So this is a weird claim, right? When you say, oh, well, they're not fully a human yet, I would say, well, what do you mean by that, that they're still developing? Because, by the way, humans have stages of human development. Look at the chart on the bottom left there. It says you go from prenatal period to infancy to babyhood to childhood, from early to late childhood, puberty. Oh, you're still developing during puberty. Oh, well, they aren't fully developed yet. So I guess you can kill, prepubescent individuals. Well, you can kill teenagers because they're still going through puberty as well, right? That's a process. The process. So they're still developing, which means you can kill them, right? Early adolescence into late adolescence, then adulthood, there's young adulthood into later adulthood, there's middle age, and then old age. Your whole life you're developing. This is a stupid argument. Don't mean to get too upset, but this is so stupid. Your entire life you're developing. What does it mean to say you aren't fully developed? You're always developing. You always are your whole life. When do humans stop developing? Like, when do you stop growing? And also, by that claim, they aren't fully developed. Okay, so if someone doesn't have an arm, they're just not human, right? Like this little kid, he's just not a human being because he just lacks an arm. Or this guy on the right, he's a well-known speaker, he's amazing. But he's just not a human being because he lacks arms and legs, and he only has one foot. Not even a leg, just one foot. But I mean, he's married and has kids, but no, no, no. No, no. He's not a human being because he's not fully developed. What does that mean? That's stupid. Well, that isn't even a baby yet. Again, so stupid. We already explained that this is a human being. So just explain to them over and over again whatever statement they're going to say. Just explain all these definitions, all these definitions. We shouldn't force disabled people to be born into a life that will be difficult for them. So this is another one. This is a poorly veiled form of eugenics saying that disabled people have lives that are so difficult, so uniquely difficult that we shouldn't allow them to be born because then they'll suffer their whole lives. Nobody who's fully able-bodied, whatever that means, nobody who is fully able-bodied and super wealthy in a safe area ever gets depressed and ever commits suicide, except, as my response, for a ton of top athletes, super geniuses, super famous people, super rich people, billionaires who struggle with depression and suicidality and kill themselves. Disability doesn't change the value of life, nor does it make life worse than it is for others who have way more. Difficult, everyone differs in their abilities, and that doesn't mean we should just kill everyone who will struggle in life. I said this to my students while I was doing this presentation. How many of you could do all the things that I do intellectually? And like none of my students raise their hands, right? They're a humble bunch. I think a couple of them actually could. In either case, I said as a teacher, I would expect that to be the case. There's a lot of things I know that they just don't because they're high schoolers. So since you are lower in your ability than I am, does that mean that suddenly your life just isn't as valuable, isn't as meaningful, isn't equal in value to mine? No, just because we have different abilities and that I might be more abled in many ways than some of them doesn't mean that their life is less valuable or less meaningful or less deserving of having been, right? There's no such thing as forcing disabled people to be born, because you could say that we force every human being to be born because no human being has the choice of existing. But that's not a thing to choose. That's just a thing that happens. And then you get the choice to do what you will with your life. But to say that, oh, a life will be difficult and therefore we should end it early. Life will be difficult for rich people. Life will be difficult for famous people. Life will be difficult for top athletes. Life will be difficult for super geniuses. Life will be difficult for all these different people who are physically and mentally and financially stable. And yet we don't ever say anything about their lives being difficult or them, we shouldn't force them to be born because if you're born rich, oh, so many people are going to be fake around you just to get your money. You won't know if you have real relationships. Oh, that sounds exhausting. It's just so difficult. So we should really make sure that those people kill their children early on. No, no, people in the pro-choice group never really argue that way because they know that, if they actually thought about it, they realize, oh, life is difficult for basically everyone at some point. Now, yes, some people have easier lives than others, but that doesn't justify killing a person before they're born, right? Everyone has difficulty, everyone has struggle, and people who seem that they would be the happiest people on earth because of their wealth and status kill themselves or struggle with horrible addictions their whole lives. So, no, that doesn't change the value of life or the ease of it. If they bring up a violinist argument where basically this person says, okay, you've got this individual, and they're a world famous violinist, but they need to use your body in order to stay alive, something like that. And so what's going to happen is we're going to put you to sleep, and you're going to wake up with this person attached to your body, right? This other human being, this other human body is attached to yours, and you have to let them feed off of your body for 9 months. 9 months in order to keep them alive as they undergo some important recovery over a procedure. So, what's funny about the violinist argument, if you actually see it in its full form, it's not a good argument. There's been a lot of responses to it. But number one, it doesn't actually reflect in a clear analogy anything between pregnancy and the analogy given, because your body generically is not like some sort of feeding station for some other adult body, right? The womb, the uterus, is specifically for the gestation of of human life. So it's not like you're going against something in an unnatural way. That's an extremely natural process. It's how reproduction and the generation of species works, right? The generation of new organisms. So don't you know that this also proves the child is a human being with their own body and with a right to life? If you take their analogy to its extent, you're saying, oh, so you admit that it is a separate human being with a separate body. That actually undermines the other arguments that you were trying to make. You've just destroyed the my body, my choice argument by using an example that shows the other person as having their own body. So their false analogy also is self-destructive. But again, it's a false analogy. In one case, you're letting a sick adult die. In the other, you are actively and intentionally taking the life of someone who would otherwise grow to development. This automatically explains how the argument fails to make a proper analogy by missing the essential moral principle of the abortion debate, which is the intentional removal of a developing human life, specifically a child, in a natural state, which is, after reproduction. An unborn baby developing, if left in their current state, will reach the proper stage proper for pregnancy. If the violinist is left in their current state, they will die, right, without being connected to some person. These are exactly opposite situations. And she even concedes that the fetus is a living human person in her paper, so not that helpful. If they bring up the fertility clinic on fire thought experiment, where they say, "Oh, there's a clinic with one baby and then 1,000 fully fertilized embryos," right? If you only had a chance to save one, what would you do? What would you do? Well, that's not the right thing to ask, right? The question should not be, what would you do? Pick up the 1,000 fertilized embryos or go for the one screaming 1-year-old or 2-year-old? The question is, what should I do given my beliefs about life? Thus, in consideration of the morality of the situation, I should save all of the fertilized babies, fertilized embryos that would otherwise die. The best answer would be to save as many lives as I could in that scenario if I only could save one. That is all. That's what I should do. It's not what I would do, it's what I should do. Because the screaming child would probably activate something in my senses, and in the fear of the fire, I would just not be able to reach to the other ones quick enough. But also, it is not even a good analogy, right? It goes like this. You are in a burning fertility clinic, and I hear a 5-year-old child crying for help. Across the room is a container marked 1,000 viable human embryos. Flames are rising, smoke is filling the air, and you can only save one. Child or a container of embryos. According to Tomlinson, if you would choose to save the crying child, you're betraying the fact that, whatever you may say, you really believe embryos aren't equivalent to human beings. How otherwise could you justify saving one over 1,000? Gotcha, right? Not really. First, this argument has nothing whatsoever to do with abortion. In no instance does a woman or her doctor ever choose between saving the life of one child at an advanced stage of development or 1,000 at an earlier stage. Obviously, guys, these are a lot of false analogies or they're not equivalent. There's no real analogy here. Abortion involves the intentional killing of one or multiple children who, in most cases, would have lived if left alone. There's no fire happening. There's no fire happening in the woman's stomach, in her womb, right? The child would have been fine if left alone. So we're not choosing between one or 1,000. There's no analogy here, which means as an argument for abortion, the burning fertility clinic is toast. And that's from breakpoint.org. If they bring up the sperm equals living entity argument and they say, "Oh, well, so every single time that an individual releases, a man releases his sperm, he's just killing all of those human lives." No, strawman fallacy, right? Remember, we said that at conception is when human life begins. The sperm by itself is not an individual human life because it only has half the genetic information and conception hasn't happened yet. When the sperm meets the egg is when conception happens. Therefore, when the sperm meets the egg is when we actually get a human life beginning. So they've completely forgotten what we said at the beginning of this presentation if they brought that up. These are some questions I could ask them. Do you know biologically what makes something alive? Do you support genocide of disabled people? Do you support the genocide of poor people? I know it sounds polemical and harsh, but ask these questions because this is what pro-choice people do. And it swings a lot of audiences, so use the same polemics. I know it's crazy, but a lot of people are really swayed by emotion. Difference is, we aren't just arguing with emotion. I've given you all of the data you need in order to prove that this is actually an issue, right? There's so many people who are suffering as individuals who have disabilities and are being unfairly treated or acted against or spoken against or being killed disproportionately because of their disability. So yes, this is a genocide of disabled people and the genocide of poor people. They say, oh, what if they're born into a poor family? What if they're born into a violent lifestyle, violent neighborhood? It's awful. So bring those up because that's not just, it is emotional, but it's not just emotional. We have logic and facts on our side to support the arguments we're making. So bring up a woman should not be forced to care for something that she doesn't want. Ask them if a homeless person is not a person that you want around you, should they be killed? If you are in an upper class neighborhood and someone of a racial group that you don't like walks into your neighborhood, should they be killed since you don't want them around you? If an immigrant makes you feel uncomfortable and you feel that they are impeding your career opportunities by taking your jobs, should you be allowed to kill them? Right? These are common liberal tactics and environments that they're usually bringing up. So, you'll be allowed to kill them. More questions? Only if they bring up overpopulation or, the difference between overpopulation and overcrowding, which is not actually a global issue. And then finally, this is a really important question. At what point does the killing stop? At what point will you stop treating people as less than human to justify your extermination and oppression of them? At what point? At what point? Oh, I thought that would be an abortion. Ooh, no, that's the Muslim slave trade. My bad. Well, that was a different time where, people tried to change how they defined a human being and human rights in order to justify your extermination and oppression, right? That was a different scenario. This one, oh no, that's a Trail of Tears. No, that was with Native Americans. Oh man. Well, I could have sworn there was abortion here. Well, at what point will you stop redefining what counts as a human being and treating them unfairly as a result of your redefining? At what point? No, that was chattel slavery for Africans on their way to the Americas. That's a different case. That's a different case in which we decided to redefine what it means to be a human being of equal value. At what point, though, will this stop? No, that was the Holocaust. That was the Holocaust. That was a different case where we redefined it. I could have sworn that abortion was somewhere. There it is. This is rhetorically useful because it shows that this exact same thing has happened over and over throughout human history. We treat people as less than humans to justify our extermination and oppression of them against so many people, especially so many women in the Muslim slave trade for so long, the Trail of Tears, and the way that we treated many Native Americans, the way that we treated many Africans that we brought over. Yes, also the way that many Africans treated Africans when they sold them to many Europeans, and then the way that many Jewish people and gypsies and other people were treated during the Holocaust and World War II. And finally, yet again, but now in the form of fetal genocide, fetal and infanticidal oppression. My body, my choice. The baby is just a burden, not even human. Heard it before so many times throughout human history. It gets old after a while. Why are the lives of the disabled worth less than your life? Why? Why do they not count as human beings? That's evil. That is evil. They count as human beings too. So, this is why you should choose life. With all that I've shown, I have proven that pro-life is the better position biblically, logically, biologically for the mother's health, psychologically due to post-abortive trauma, philosophically and morally. In every respect from science and logic, pro-life is the correct position. Will you be intelligent, honest people who are open-minded enough to admit that the pro-life position is the more logical position? Or will you stubbornly refuse to see reality and truth for what they are, choosing to live in a world of make-believe that justifies murder, genocide, racism, ableism, and the devaluation of humanity? The choice is yours. I say choose life. Choose life.